Turning vacant and abandoned properties into assets. Vacant and abandoned properties have negative spillover effects that impact neighboring properties and, when concentrated, entire communities and even cities. Research links foreclosed, vacant, and abandoned properties with reduced property values, increased crime, increased risk to public health and welfare, and increased costs for municipal governments. Studies attempting to quantify the effect of foreclosures on surrounding property values find that foreclosures depress the sales prices of nearby homes by as little as 0% to as much as 8%. Foreclosed homes may or may not become vacant or abandoned, at which point a distressed property may have a more pronounced effect on surrounding properties. In a study of Columbus, Ohio, McKell finds that vacant properties have a more severe impact on their immediate surroundings than do foreclosures, which have a relatively modest impact but over a larger area. Whitaker and Fitzpatrick also separate vacant properties from foreclosures in assessing spillover effects, finding that in the Cleveland area, being within 500 feet of a vacant property depresses the sale price of a non-distressed home by 1% in low-poverty areas and 2% in medium-poverty areas. Research also suggests that the longer a property remains vacant, the greater its impact on surrounding property values and the larger the radius of this effect. A study of Baltimore finds that this impact is confined to within 250 feet of properties that have been abandoned for less than 3 years. After 3 years, however, the impact can extend as far as 1,500 feet, although at a smaller magnitude. Vacant and abandoned properties are widely considered to attract crime because of the broken windows theory, that one sign of abandonment or disorder, a broken window, will encourage further disorder. Increased vacancies leave fewer neighbors to monitor and combat criminal activity. Boarded doors, unkempt lawns, and broken windows can signal an unsupervised safe haven for criminal activity or a target for theft of, for example, copper and appliances. Chway's study of Pittsburgh shows that foreclosure has no effect on crime. However, after a property becomes vacant, the rate of violent crime within 250 feet of the property is 15% higher than the rate in the area between 250 and 353 feet from the property. In addition, longer periods of vacancy have a greater effect on crime rates. In a study of Philadelphia, Branas, Rubin, and Guo report an association between vacant properties and risk of assault, finding vacancy to be the strongest predictor among almost a dozen indicators after controlling for other demographic and socioeconomic variables. Arson is a particular problem for vacant and abandoned properties. The U.S. Fire Administration estimates that there were 28,000 fires annually in vacant residences between 2006 and 2008, with half of these spreading to the rest of the building and 11% spreading to a nearby building. The organization also estimates that 37% of these fires were intentionally set and that 45 deaths, 225 injuries, and $900 million in property damage result from these fires each year. Because vacancies are so closely associated with arson, vandalism, and other crimes, local ordinances routinely label vacant or abandoned properties as a threat to the health and welfare of the community. Local governments bear the cost of maintaining, administering, and demolishing vacant and abandoned properties as well as servicing them with police and fire protection and public infrastructure. One study calculated that the city of Philadelphia spends more than $20 million annually to maintain some 40,000 vacant properties, which cost a conservatively estimated $5 million per year in lost tax revenue to the city and school district. In their 2005 Chicago study, Apgar, Duda, and Iraqi estimate direct municipal costs ranging from $430 for a foreclosed and vacated property sold at auction to $34,199 for a vacant property destroyed by fire, based on varying durations of vacancy, remediation efforts, and other circumstances such as crime. Doors and windows must be secured and often covered with plywood, lawns cut, and trash removed. Maintenance costs vary according to the property's location and condition. For example, Chicago officials estimated costs of $875,000 to board up or secure 627 properties in 2010, whereas Detroit officials estimated costs of $1 million to do the same for 6,000 properties over a period of nearly a year and a half. Lawn mowing costs can add up quickly, as in the case of the $25 spent on each of Detroit's 45,000 city-owned lots and properties. A 2009 study from Baltimore concluded that each vacant property on a block increased annual police and fire expenditures by $1,472. According to a study of vacant and abandoned properties in Oklahoma City, commercial properties disproportionately affect these public safety costs. Although commercial properties make up only 3% of Oklahoma City's vacancies, they account for approximately 40% of all police and fire calls. Demolition costs can vary widely based on several factors, including whether the home is attached to occupied residences, such as a Baltimore row house that can cost $40,000 to demolish, or whether it contains asbestos or lead-based paint. GAO states that demolition typically costs between $4,800 and $7,000 per property. Municipalities also incur administrative costs as they search for owners, enforce codes, and oversee foreclosures, although they may recover some of these costs through fines or fees if an owner can be identified and compelled to pay. Vacancies also reduce local government revenues directly, because owners may walk away from their tax obligations, and indirectly, because of their impact on nearby property values and tax assessments. Although in some instances cities can recover this lost revenue through tax lien sales, in others property ownership reverts to the city, which has no viable option other than demolition. Code enforcement and tax foreclosure can result in owners taking responsibility for or selling properties, public ownership of vacant properties, or public sale of properties to new owners. Local market conditions will govern the possible reuses of these properties. Governments and nonprofits are using data tools to create neighborhood typologies based primarily on market conditions to guide reuse strategies. In stronger markets, policymakers and community organizations attempt to prevent vacancies in the first place or keep them from spreading, get responsible owners and occupants into vacant properties as quickly as possible, and try to stabilize property values and reverse decline. An emerging trend among these stakeholders is to target resources in stronger neighborhoods that are at risk but are not yet distressed. In other cases, resources have been concentrated in low-income target areas to reach the critical mass needed to sustain private investment. In such distressed neighborhoods, markets may be too weak to facilitate the reoccupancy of vacant properties. In shrinking cities, large-scale demolition and repurposing are needed to reduce the supply of housing to match demand as well as to deal with properties that cannot be rehabilitated cost-effectively for market sale or rental. For more detail on the methodologies and applications of such efforts, see Targeting Strategies for Neighborhood Development. Strategies for Stronger Markets. Stronger markets offer the possibility of keeping owner-occupants in homes at risk of becoming vacant or quickly reoccupying homes that have already become vacant. Foreclosure prevention programs, rehabilitation for sale, or scattered site rental housing are among the stronger market strategies that promise to reduce the inventory of vacant homes. Neighborhood marketing and commercial revitalization strategies can help these neighborhoods retain and attract residents by stimulating the demand necessary to reoccupy vacant homes. Some severely dilapidated vacant properties in these neighborhoods might still require demolition, but these typically would be single lots, which would provide opportunities for small-scale reuse such as side lot adoption or community gardens. Because foreclosures are a major cause of vacancy in stronger markets, limiting them could go a long way towards stabilizing these neighborhoods. Not all distressed borrowers can avoid losing their homes, explains law professor and financial services expert Patricia A. McCoy, but in appropriate cases, where modifications can increase investors' return compared to foreclosure and the borrowers can afford the new payments, loan modifications can be a win-win for all. 48 loan modification and refinancing programs, augmented by foreclosure counseling, aim to keep owner-occupants in their homes. Major initiatives in foreclosure prevention include two federal programs, the Home Affordable Modification Program, HAMP, and the National Foreclosure Mitigation Counseling Program, NFMC. HAMP has processed more than 1 million permanent loan modifications since 2009. HAMP participants have high rates of redefault, however, reaching 46% in 2013 for modifications initiated in 2009. A 2012 assessment of HAMP found that although the program led to a modest reduction in the rate of foreclosures, it reached only about a third of eligible households and had an adverse effect on loan renegotiations outside of the program. Mayer et al. Find better results for NFMC, concluding that the program improved loan quality for participants, reducing monthly payments by 7%. By keeping owner-occupants in their homes, foreclosure prevention programs can avoid many of the problems such as code violations, the visible signs of neglect, that arise once a property becomes vacant. Vacant properties may require rehabilitation before they can be reoccupied. Healthy markets may offer private investors sufficient economic incentives to purchase, rehabilitate, and resell formerly vacant properties. In other cases, public subsidy or a nonprofit's intervention may be able to turn a vacant home into an owner-occupied one. Although owner occupancy might be the most desirable reuse of foreclosed and vacated properties, investor activity, through both market sale and tax foreclosure auctions, has opened up scattered site rental of single-family homes as one way of dealing with still habitable residences located in neighborhoods with sufficient rental demand. Danilo Pelletier, former research director of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition and current HUD economist, suggests that the new and returning households that are needed to reduce vacancy and stabilize neighborhoods are most likely to be renters, whether by choice or from necessity, a trend that is already observable. 53 CDCs would also likely have an interest in acquiring tax-foreclosed properties and operating them as rentals, both to increase the stock of affordable housing and to stabilize the neighborhoods in which they have already invested. CDCs are likely to face significant challenges, however, in managing scattered site rental properties, which by one estimate cost 25 to 30% more to manage compared with multifamily properties. First look programs allow nonprofits or a particular type of buyer, such as neighbors, to bid on REO or tax foreclosed properties before other investors do. The National First Look program gives Neighborhood Stabilization Program grantees the opportunity to acquire properties owned by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac before they are offered to the highest bidder. In some instances, lenders or mortgage servicers may agree to rent to the former owners of foreclosed homes, offering some of the same benefits to the community as foreclosure prevention. Strategies to reoccupy vacant homes, either by owners or renters, depend on a neighborhood's ability to retain and attract residents. Efforts to market a neighborhood can help stabilize housing markets and reduce vacancy and abandonment. The Healthy Neighborhoods Initiative of the Greater Milwaukee Foundation, for example, conducted tours of neighborhoods that it had targeted for image promotion, resulting in the sale of 22 vacant homes to first-time homebuyers. NeighborWorks America, a national housing and community development nonprofit, has recognized neighborhood marketing and branding as a strategy for strengthening housing demand and attracting private investment. In 2012, the organization worked intensively with 16 neighborhood organizations to aggressively market neighborhoods. Residential stabilization and revitalization would be aided and complemented by commercial revitalization in areas with markets strong enough to support it. Vibrant residential neighborhoods can better support neighborhood retail, and abundant retail options, in turn, will help attract and retain residents. Rebuilding neighborhood retail should be planned comprehensively as an integral piece of the larger community that surrounds it, and it should be tailored to the realities of the area, Wright Bayard, Polakiewicz, and Bond. They argue that public-private partnerships with a long-term commitment to reinvestment are necessary to rebuild neighborhood retail. Even in neighborhoods with relatively healthy housing markets, however, selective demolition may be necessary when vacant properties are severely dilapidated. When the cost of rehabilitating a vacant or abandoned property exceeds its expected market value after rehabilitation, market-based solutions would be unlikely to result in remediation. Although a vacant lot typically has less adverse impact on surrounding properties than a vacant or abandoned structure, demolition programs could also plan for what to do with the vacant lot that remains once the structure is removed, such as turning the lot into a landscaped pedestrian pathway or bike trail, a park, a parking lot, or a community garden. Research shows that the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society's Philadelphia Land Care Program, which clears and landscapes vacant lots, has improved residents' perception of safety, reduced certain gun crimes, and boosted property values. Vacant properties that have been reused as community gardens, according to one study, have a positive effect on nearby property values up to 1,000 feet from the garden. The researchers find that these gardens can have the greatest impact in high-poverty neighborhoods. Strategies for weak markets and shrinking cities. In neighborhoods where housing markets are weak, where supply far exceeds demand, and in cities that are losing population, many of the strategies discussed above are unlikely to result in owner-occupied use of once vacant properties. As Moloch and Brackman advise, cities such as Youngstown or Detroit, where 30% of their land areas are vacant, and which continue to lose population, need to think about land reutilization in fundamentally different ways than a city in which 10% or less of its land area is vacant, or where the city's population appears to be stabilizing, such as Milwaukee or Newark. 64 even cities with overall population stability or growth may still have neighborhoods or groups of neighborhoods in which markets cannot support revitalization strategies such as scattered site rental housing or neighborhood marketing. Cities that have lost half or more of their peak populations have a far larger housing supply, transportation and utilities infrastructure, and service area than they have people to use and pay for them. For decades, planners and politicians alike have attempted to grow their cities out of such problems. Increasingly, however, they are looking toward right-sizing or smart decline as a way to adjust city services and housing stock to suit smaller populations. Youngstown, Ohio and Flint, Michigan are two cities in which planners have explicitly acknowledged the need to adjust to declining populations. Right-sized cities will more efficiently allocate limited resources if, for example, residents are concentrated in denser areas, allowing the city to shunt infrastructure currently serving few residents. But, says Brent D. Ryan, professor of urban design and public policy at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, right-sizing is a controversial, yet unproved process that raises issues of equity, among others. City officials cannot force residents to relocate to denser areas, and creating incentives to encourage residents to leave their homes can be difficult. Even cities with rampant vacancy have residents scattered amidst otherwise empty blocks. The interventions that may be necessary to address vacant and abandoned properties in neighborhoods with weak markets and in shrinking cities include large-scale demolition and repurposing. Cities such as Buffalo, which in the 2000s conducted a 5 in 5 campaign to demolish 5,000 properties in 5 years, can barely keep up with the backlog of thousands of vacant properties. As noted above, demolition can be extremely costly. To aid state and local efforts to fund large-scale demolition, the U.S. Department of the Treasury has authorized the use of the Hardest-Hit Fund, part of the Troubled Asset Relief Program, for demolition in 18 eligible states and the District of Columbia, although no funds had been expended for that purpose as of June 30, 2013. In Ohio, the Attorney General chose to designate up to $75 million of the state's share of the national mortgage settlement to reimburse counties for demolition. As of February 4, 2014, Ohio counties had expended over $65 million to demolish 8,390 units, with approximately $41 million of that total reimbursed by the Attorney General. Although these funding sources are vital for communities struggling to keep up with demolition demands, they are not ongoing, so alternatives will be needed if large numbers of properties continue to be slated for demolition. Large swaths of vacant land require large-scale repurposing strategies such as urban agriculture, woodlands, or parks and recreation facilities. Such green reuses promise the added benefit of improving stormwater management. Heavy rainstorms frequently overwhelm the combined sewer and stormwater infrastructure of many older cities, forcing them to dump untreated sewage mixed with stormwater into waterways at an estimated rate of 850 billion gallons annually. Diverting rainwater to these 13 repurposed properties not only addresses this significant environmental problem but also reduces air pollution and surface area temperatures, lowers municipal stormwater management costs, and enhances neighborhood aesthetics. Land banks can be especially effective in banking contiguous lots for larger repurposing projects. See, countywide land banks tackle vacancy and blight. Brownfields, which are common in former industrial centers, present opportunities for large-scale repurposing as open green or recreational spaces, community gardens or farms, or brightfields, sites for generating wind or solar power. Would-be developers of brownfields must consider the costs of site assessment, remediation, and liability against profit expectations, which can be limited by weak markets and other macroeconomic factors. Creative, organic, and sometimes temporary uses of vacant land emerge when neighbors and other residents act ahead of city governments, land banks, or developers. See, temporary urbanism, alternative approaches to vacant land. In Brightmoor, a Detroit neighborhood with a high vacancy rate and a population of roughly 1,700, residents purchased or took responsibility for nearly 100 nearby vacant lots, consolidating them with their own property for their own use. Sometimes such organic use is illegal, as in the case of scavenging or squatting. Vacant and abandoned properties present daunting challenges to communities nationwide. Evidence shows that vacant and abandoned properties drag down local economies, impede population growth, depress property values, increase crime, and impose heavy cost burdens on local governments. Cities and communities are increasingly using data to inform the targeted deployment of limited resources and are addressing problem properties with a range of strategies that fit local market and demographic conditions. What you have to be able to do, says Alan Mallock of the Brookings Institution and the Center for Community Progress, is to come up with ways to reuse the lots so that they will hopefully enhance, and at a minimum not detract from, the attractiveness of the neighborhood to homebuyers, investors, and rehabbers. 78 In some cases, such measures might spur redevelopment and economic revitalization. In other cases, it might be more appropriate to focus on managing decline in ways that improve the quality of life for those who remain. Instead of cities focusing so much on growing, they should really focus on making themselves attractive and having the market respond to that, says Justin Hollander, Associate Professor of Urban and Environmental Policy and Planning at Tufts University. If a place becomes more desirable, it likely will lead to further growth in the future. More research will be needed to empower policymakers, investors, and citizens to make evidence-based decisions on difficult choices, such as when to rehabilitate and when to demolish, whether to have a judicial or administrative foreclosure process, whether to convert a brownfield to an affordable housing development or a green space, or whether a particular area should pursue smart growth or smart decline. Innovative design techniques promise to expand the range of options for reuse. As practitioners experiment with creative new uses of formerly vacant and abandoned properties, researchers will need to evaluate strategies and determine which work and which do not, which are most cost-effective, and which are most sustainable. More research will help decision-makers become better equipped to turn problem properties into assets that will stabilize and revitalize neighborhoods and improve residents' quality of life.